Hello and welcome to the Car Care Nut channel and welcome to another LS430. Now this LS430 comes to us from California. Owner bought it a few months ago from California. Zero rust underneath it. Car is beautiful. It is an Ultra and it is air suspension and soft closed doors and all the whistles, bells and whistles, and they all work. So that's a big, huge plus. This is a 2004, and the owner initially brought it in for a timing belt, to replace power steering fluid, and then we found out the valve covers were leaking, so we did those. That's all done. That's nothing new and exciting. But there is one issue that you might run into as an LS430 owner, and this is where I want you to see how things can really go out of hand with these LSs if you're not careful when you're buying one. There's a simple concern here, the trunk release button. If you use the key to unlock the trunk, it opens perfectly fine. If you use the button that is right here on the inside, this is a smart key car, if you use the button that is here, it opens perfectly fine. But if you use the button on the trunk, it doesn't work. Let's so you can get an idea, I'm gonna show you how we can replicate that. So this is basically the same thing as a striker. I'm going to put it right here. I lock the trunk, but there's one more step. There's actually a button here on these. That's the soft close part. So you heard that? That's what actually pulls the trunk down. And now the computer knows that the trunk is closed. If I press and hold the trunk release, let's listen to the latch. It's unlocked. Now I'm going to lock it again, and I'm going to go use the button on the inside. The button on the inside doesn't work for a good reason, because I was also testing, there's a lock button right next to it. So I'm going to unlock it, and now that works. But here's the problem. Here's where the problem starts. I'm going to lock it again. Pressing the button on the trunk. I have nothing. Initially, the first thing people do, and this is what the owner of this car did. Oh, the button must be bad. He replaced it, same exact thing. And then he replaced it again, because he initially bought an aftermarket one. He bought an original one, same thing. The thing about these LSs is this was the first generation smart key. Whenever you see a smart key, your diagnosis approach should change from the usual to the unusual. Because for starters, this button doesn't just connect to a motor that unlocks it and that's it. This goes through computers and all kinds of complications. I mean, the newer cars are less complicated than this because this was like the infancy of smart keys. So here is how this whole mess works. There's a motor right here. Actually, initially it is simple. There's a motor right here. This is what pulls the latch open and then it unlocks it as well. That's very simple. Then this is controlled by a computer which lives right here in the trunk. Looks like a fuse block. But it is actually a computer. So you notice right now I have a pin right there. I have it connected to where that button goes to. So I'm going to put my tester here. And all that button does is it gives a ground. Now here, I have my power probe on the pin that comes from the switch. Here's what I'm going to do. Right now we're reading 10.7 volts, which is normal. It's just the internal voltage of the computer. But when I press the button, we have a solid ground. Because all this button does is it connects ground. If you notice right here on the button, We only have two wires. One of them is white with a black tracer. Whenever you see that on Toyota, that's 99% of the time, that's a ground. And then another wire. Basically, all the switch does is it connects these two. So if you're not sure about your switch, before you go buy one, jump these. If it works, then you have a bad switch. If you jump them and they don't work, then you do not have a bad switch, you have something else. Which is where this car kind of progressed. When you have a working latch and all the other buttons work except one, you need to ask yourself a very important question. I don't think we have a problem with the latch and the buttons and all this stuff. We have something else, and this is where that old school smart key comes in. Folks, if you have this issue, I want you to observe something with the smart keys. I'm going to lock this car, and then we're going to walk and stand by the door. And if you look at the key, what it's going to start doing, if Eros can get us a shot on the key, look at the blinking light on the key. Do you see that blinking light? That blinking light means the key is communicating with the car. That means that the receiver or the oscillator in the car oscillated, and the key now is communicating the key code. So now I can use the smart key function to open the door and equally lock it. But the curious thing is about this system is it also does that for the trunk. If the car is locked and you walk up to the car and press a button, it's going to do the same thing. So you already know what happened with this one. When I come and stand here, I have nothing on the key. This key is not oscillating. This key is not doing a thing. It needs to pick up the signal of the key for that button to work. There is an oscillator here that picks that up. And this is how you find these. Because if I take right now, my key is here. Let's take this tester off so it won't keep beeping on us. Nothing. If I take my key down in the trunk, it actually works. And the reason for that is they put a kind of a low-level oscillator inside. In case you forget your keys in the trunk, you can actually still open the trunk, even if the car is locked. That is kind of a cool feature. But what is not cool about it is it doesn't work right now because we have a problem. And we're going to get to it in a second, but I want to show you a simple trick, kind of. If you have this issue and your truck does not open, this is how you test it. So right now, we have nothing. But if you take your key and put it right on top of the third brake light and press and hold the button, you just have to move it and find just the right spot. There we go. The reason for that is if you get really close to that oscillator in the trunk, it's actually going to think that the key is inside. But it just has to be a specific spot. People will say, wait a second, isn't that something for theft? No, because it needs to pick up the key. But here's what happened to this car. Let's take a looky-loo. This, just like I told you, is the most complicated smart key system because the oscillators were very rudimentary and very basic, and they were basically horrendous, for lack of a better word. So this had a receiver, and then an oscillator, and then a separate antenna. And the antenna actually went behind the bumper. Super duper complicated. Basically, the oscillator receives the signal, sends it to the receiver, and then that takes the signal back to the computers. It is ridiculous how complicated this is. The new cars are not like that at all. They're actually a lot simpler. But here's what we have. Let's look in the corner. And I'll hold the light so you guys can see what I'm seeing. First of all, we have signs of trouble. I see glue, I see non-original bolt, and kind of signs of body work. We have the VIN sticker here, so this is the original one, so this might have been a small accident. But I also see signs of water. You see, if you look down here, right in the corner, you're going to see a line of dirt, then it stops. That is your telltale sign of water. And then the next telltale sign, this is a junkyard part. Toyota doesn't just write random numbers on their parts with a paint marker. This is a junkyard part. And that is the first red flag. But then we look at the trio, the three brothers, if you would. Here's the receiver. Here's the oscillator. And then the antenna is the blue wire that actually goes outside the car. When I pull the wire off of this is what I see. You see that? This is what I call ugliness. Really ugly. This is green monsters. This is gremlins in the making. At some point, this car had sitting water in there and it just submerged everything. This is such a common thing with these, and people usually misdiagnose it as a switch. Folks, diagnosis is important. I have so many viewers email me, call the shop. I have a problem with my car. What do you think it is? I would love to help you, but you know what? There is diagnosis involved. Because you notice that I ripped the trunk, this, because you got to check everything. You just can't throw a part at a car. This is not how diagnosis works. I need to look at the car. You need to trace all your wiring, because it could very simply be a broken wire here, that this switch is not sending its signal there. Then it will be as simple as that. But once you get the car and you see what the key is doing, it's the process, and this process changes as the car comes up. Let's look at the other side of this car, because I also have some interesting signs here. So you look here, I see the same thing, but I don't see signs of bodywork. So I wonder if this trunk was left open, if something happened to this car. But it looks similar to this side, but the only difference is I see signs of bodywork. This is not factory, my friends. I can guarantee you that. And this little bolt with sealer on it, that is not factory. Something happened here, and this is how you investigate accidents as well. I see signs somebody's been here and there was water, and this is a problem. On the other side, I also see signs of water, but I don't see the damage that it entails. So perhaps this was something that happened in the past. Something happened in the back of this car. It's been in a minor accident, but it was enough to have enough water in there to cause all these issues. So we go back to the same thing with diagnosis. If you don't know how the car works, how would you know that it actually needs to pick up the key for the trunk to work? That's because it's as simple as this. People will do this. Oh, it doesn't work. Oh, I have a signal there. It must be a bad computer. Let's go spend another $1,000 to replace that, and guess what? It didn't fix it. Then they'll be like, oh, it must be something with the latch. Maybe the motor. Let's replace the latch. I see this over and over and over. And sometimes this problem is actually a weak battery. So that was the first thing. When I started seeing that we don't have a communication problem, we actually potentially have a smart key problem, I replaced the battery here. Because if you have a weak battery, it's also not going to work. That's another, that would be the best one. Unfortunately, in this case, that is not the case. So what are we going to do with this car? These old school oscillator, receiver, and antenna, they're ridiculous expensive. I mean, ridiculous. The receiver, I believe, was $1,000. The antenna was $300, and the oscillator was $500. We're going to spend over $2,000 just to fix the little button. Obviously, I don't recommend the customer does that on a car that's older, either. Although it's beautiful, but it's not a good idea. So here's what we will actually do for this situation. I'm going to try to jump these wires across, hoping that the corrosion is just on the connectors and there's nothing internally corroded in these components. Now, some people will say, we can take them apart and start seeing. I don't do that. Remember, I got warranty stuff. If the customer wants to experiment with that, that's fine. Now they have a concrete diagnosis of what's going on. Folks, I cannot emphasize how important diagnosis is. because this could easily turn into you spending $2,000 and not fixing the issue. And this is how automotive repair derails all the time. And this is a simple concern. I mean, is it the end of the world that the button doesn't work in the trunk? It's not. It's nice to get it working in a car like this, but it's not the end of the world. But imagine if this was something a lot more serious, like your headlights, like your tail lights, for example, that don't work and nobody knows what's going on. This is how accident damage can turn into nightmares, basically, because hidden damage, water damage, is a disaster. Water damage doesn't appear right away, because when you wet this connector, everything will work fine. But then give it a week, it's all green, and everything stops working. You have high resistance, and the problems start. Be careful with accident cars. And one thing I will tell you about these specific cars, there is too much going on in the size of the trunk. If you look at a Camry, there's really nothing here. Even if this fills up with water and you turn it in the fish tank, nothing really will happen because there's nothing in the ground. But here, you have so much. This is an LS. They do have a lot. You gotta be careful. And I know everything is apart right now, but you can actually look in this area just by pulling a little cover back. So always look. When you see signs of water that was there, investigate it, or better yet, if you're buying this car, walk away. It's not a good idea. In an LS, walk away. In another car, investigate it if there's nothing here. Folks, I hope this video is helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you. And you have yourself a wonderful day.